Culling's middle school bore the weight of monotony like an old, forgotten tome, with each school day blending into the next. Leah sat in science class, trying to recall what day it was. Thursday, she decided. Miss Baker was droning on about the periodic table. But Leah's mind was wandering, searching for something more exciting than chemical elements. She and her best friend Cammie were more than ready to break free from the chains of their stifling classrooms, and had been planning on cutting their 6th period that day. As difficult as it had been to get through science that day, Leah knew history would be nearly impossible. And then she noticed it, the lack of enthusiasm among her classmates. No one seemed to raise their hand anymore, not even the once over-eager ones. It was as if the whole class had given up on trying to answer questions, a far cry from the chaotic enthusiasm of earlier years. Leah's eyes darted around the room, confirming her observation. Not a single hand was in the air. No one cared anymore. She guessed that every generation must go through the same phases. Maybe one day, when they were close enough to the light at the end of the tunnel, they'd become more enthusiastic again. But for now, the bell couldn't come soon enough. The minutes crawled by until finally, those glorious tones set them free. Arriving at their lockers, Cammie's gaze met Leah's, and they exchanged knowing glances. The unspoken agreement passed between them. The time was now. They would attempt their daring escape from the monotony of class. Leah's heart raced at the prospect of adventure, of breaking free from the mundane routine. She had never been one to indulge in such behavior, but Cammie, ever the free spirit, always made a compelling argument for seizing the day. She had a contagious zest for life, and despite their differences, they were inseparable, especially in recent weeks, as Cammie was dealing with the grief of her older brother Connor's disappearance. "I bet your heart's pounding," Cammie said with a laugh. "Isn't yours?" asked Leah. "Nah," said Cammie. "I'm pretty much desensitized to it at this point." While other students hurried to their last dreadful class of the day, the two girls slipped as inconspicuously as possible into the restroom. Thankfully, no one else was there. The plan was to wait for the halls to empty out, then sneak down to the gym and out the back door. From there, they could make it to the field and hide out behind the concession stand or under the bleachers. When the last bell rang, they'd slip back into the crowd, hopefully unnoticed. Cammie had successfully done this alone a couple of times, but Leah's inexperience would make things interesting. Leah found the prospect of defying the rules positively exhilarating. Her excitement, however, was tempered by the eerie tales they'd heard about the hall sweep. It was said that the school custodian, Mr. Colton, had a sixth sense for catching skippers, and the unlucky ones who got caught were never quite the same. There were ridiculous whispers of brainwashing, of being replaced by soulless doppelgangers programmed to follow rules. These flights of fancy undoubtedly came from the mind of some overly imaginative student who had known someone who got caught. The fear of getting in real trouble with Principal Shelton or with one's parents would surely change a person. Like a whispered secret in a crowded room, it gained wings, soaring to legendary heights. Once the commotion in the halls had ceased, the girls peeked from the restroom door, peering down the deserted corridor. They waited another minute before setting out in the direction of the gym, occasionally glancing back in paranoid anticipation. Rounding the first corner, they found themselves staring at a janitor's cart, which had been pushed against the wall. It could only mean that Mr. Colton was nearby. They ducked behind the cart, stifling their giggles. Just as they settled into their hiding spot, a soft whimper echoed down the hallway. Leah's heart pounded as they peered around the cart. A known troublemaker named Max was backing slowly into their view, looking disoriented and frightened. Mr. Colton emerged from the shadows, his gaze locked onto Max with unsettling intensity. The girls couldn't believe they were actually witnessing someone being caught in the hall sweep. "What's the matter, Max?" Mr. Colton's voice was chillingly calm. Max responded only with silence, but on his face was an expression of sheer terror. Leah squinted, trying to make out the details as her heart raced. Mr. Colton extended his hand, and with a swift movement, he touched Max's forehead. Leah gasped as she watched Max's entire demeanor change in an instant. His shoulders straightened, and his expression transformed from confusion and fear to one of serene focus. Leah shivered. The rumors, the tales, they were true. There was something sinister about the hall sweep. She grabbed Cammie's arm, her grip tight with a mixture of fear and determination. "We have to get out of here," she whispered urgently. They slinked from behind the cart on their hands and knees, rounding the corner to retrace their steps, their earlier excitement now replaced by trepidation. But as they were standing to run, the sole of Leah's shoe squeaked across the floor. The sound echoed through the hallways. They paused for a brief moment, appalled at their sudden misfortune. Their eyes locked, and the girls silently agreed on their only course of action. They broke into a sprint toward the restroom. Just before throwing themselves through the door, they heard the familiar sound of Mr. Colton pushing his cart. He had heard them, and he was coming their way. "I know where you are," they heard him say as he approached. The two friends were shaken to their cores. There was nowhere to go. "He can't come in," whispered Leah. "Not when the girls' room is occupied. He's not allowed." But Cammie wasn't convinced. "That won't stop him," she said, now feeling the full weight of the mess she had gotten Leah into. She cast a solemn look over her shoulder at her best friend. Mouthing the words, "Don't move," she burst through the door into the hallway, narrowly avoiding the long reach of Mr. Colton's hand as he lunged. Leah could hear Cammie's footsteps as she ran past him in the opposite direction, followed by the sound of Mr. Colton's cart rolling after her, and then his cold voice. "Where are you going, Camellia?" The only one to ever call Cammie by the name Camellia had been her brother Connor. At that moment, Leah believed that somehow Mr. Colton knew that, only solidifying her view of him now as something wicked. Once they were gone, she quickly rushed to her history classroom and stepped inside. She was met with blank stares. "I'm sorry," she said, catching her breath. "I had a bathroom emergency." With that, she sat at her desk without so much as a textbook and anxiously awaited the next bell, her concern for Cammie overwhelming. Once she was released, she rushed to her locker. Cammie was standing in front of her own, the locker door open in such a way as to hide her face. Leah took a few cautious steps toward her and stopped. Cammie slowly closed her locker and turned her head to face Leah. Their gazes met, and in that moment their friendship spoke volumes. They knew they were both still themselves, untouched by whatever force was sweeping through the school. The memory of their shared laughter, the countless hours spent talking about dreams and ambitions, surged through them. Relief washed over them both, bringing smiles to their faces. The final bell rang, marking the end of the day. Leah and Cammie slipped out into the open air, the row of school buses never more inviting. The sun was warm on their faces, but the chill inside them remained, knowing they'd be back the next morning. When that time came, Leah sat in English class, the only one she shared with Cammie. But Cammie was late. Leah could barely breathe as she nervously waited. Exactly 12 minutes into the period, Cammie finally arrived and sat at her desk beside Leah. Leah watched her closely, hoping for a sign that her friend was all right, but she never made eye contact. Not once. Mr. Warren, their teacher, asked a question. Something about the required reading from the night before. Cammie's hand was the first to raise, followed by two others. Somehow, he had gotten to her. Cammie was no longer herself, and her sacrifice was the only reason Leah had not been caught. With tears in her eyes, Leah looked down at her textbook, pretending to follow along. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of what they had witnessed continued to gnaw at Leah. She felt certain that the entire school was under some sort of spell. She noticed that more and more kids were raising their hands, participating with a newfound enthusiasm. The monotony was broken, but it felt unnatural. They were lost in the sea of conformity. Students' true selves buried beneath the facade of obedience. Was there a way to bring them back? Leah held on to that hope. And also, the fear.